Welcome back to Snapkeep Arcade. This is Boots, back with Spencer Howland of Constructed Criticism for another deck guide. This week we'll be going over a deck that uses new cards from the upcoming Ravnica Allegiance set that will be released on Arena next week. Thanks for joining us, Spencer. Why don't you give us a brief overview of Blue-White Control?
Yeah, so this is a deck that we've actually talked a little bit about in the past. Early on in this format, it might have been this one, it could have been a previous one, but we've done videos on Blue-White Control before, and this is straight Teferi Blue-White Control, just like it's always been. This is a 4F Teferi deck that we are trying to be a Teferi deck. This one happens to be built for a little bit more of Arena. This is a straight Blue-White Control deck, lots of counterspells, lots of removal, but this specific version is an extremely counter-heavy deck.
Awesome, let's talk about the counterspells.
Yeah, so we have 2 Essence Scatter, 1 Negate, 2 Syncopate, 4 Absorb, and 2 Devious Cover-Up in the main deck. So Devious Cover-Up is really important in this deck. If we look back at Blue-White Control almost a year ago now, one of the cards that it used to play was Commit Memory. This is a card that went all the way back to like a Grand Prix in May of last year that Brad Nelson top aided. So what that card did is it put a card on top of its owner's library. Memory was like a flashback spell, if you guys remember the split cards from Amonkhet, where you could cast it from its graveyard with Aftermath, and then each player would shuffle their hand, graveyard, and library, and then draw 7 cards. So what you would do is you would ultimate your Teferi, and then you would cast Memory. By doing that, you would exile 7 of their lands by drawing 7 cards so that they couldn't cast the 7 cards that they played, and it would prevent you from decking yourself. So you wouldn't actually have to play additional win conditions in the deck. You could just minus Teferi and you wouldn't have to worry about it basically ever. Now, that being said, Teferi obviously being able to tuck himself makes it so that that doesn't matter anyway, but because of Memory, your deck became so dense that they basically had 0 chance to win the game, which was the real trick. And with Devious Cover-Up, it allows you to once again make your deck super dense with counter magic. So with Devious Cover-Up, since you're not casting Memory, instead what you do is you target Devious Cover-Up with the second one and then a bunch of other counter magic to fill your deck full of counter spells throughout the game. And then once you've ultimated Teferi, you don't really have to worry about anything anymore because you're drawing a counter spell every turn and then exiling a land, and you kind of just win the game that way. So it's kind of an alternate win condition from Teferi Ultimate or Nezahal. So Absorb's got a lot of stuff going on the internet. A lot of people were like, why would I ever play this over Sinister Sabotage? Which is an interesting question because I think it's just better than Sinister Sabotage in Blue-White Control specifically. So there are a few really important use cases for Absorb. One of them is targeting a Banefire that's targeting you. So Banefire is a card that a lot of decks can bring in against you to try and deal you exact lethal or close to it, and you don't have a way to deal with it because it can't be countered once it's cast for more than 5. What Absorb does is, while it doesn't counter the spell because the spell can't be countered, you still gain that 3 life, giving you an extra cushion against that card, and it can help keep you out of range by countering other spells throughout the game. The other thing it does is your worst card against aggro decks was always cancel. In other words, when you look at something like Sinister Sabotage, and by adding Absorb to your deck, you're no longer this horrible cancel deck against aggro decks. You now have a legitimate answer that you're not only like happier with, you're legitimately happy with. Gaining 3 life against a lot of decks in Standard is more so than just drawing a card, as long as it's tacked onto something else. Like, I wouldn't pay 1 mana to just gain 3 life, but if I got to counter a spell and gain 3 life, I'm extremely happy with that transaction against lots of different decks.
Tell us about the removal in Blue-White Control.
Yeah, so this deck specifically is playing 3 Seal Away. The other spell it's playing is a new spell. It's called Warrant, Warden. So this spell is a split card. It's hybrid blue-white, hybrid blue-white. For an instant, you put target attacking or blocking creature on the top of its owner's library. And then Warden is a spell that lets you make a 4/4. So this card is good for a few reasons. One of the reasons that it's good is it's not dead against control. When you're playing best of 1 on MTG Arena, you don't want as many dead cards. And these split cards were actually specifically designed to help with best of 1 on Arena. So this allows you to have this card that's pretty good against a lot of the mid-range decks by, putting a creature on top of its owner's library. A lot of people think that's card disadvantage for you. That's actually not true. It actually did remove the creature and you did get a straight 1/1. You happen to know their next draw step, which can be also more powerful than killing the creature in a lot of instances. So for example, if you want to put something like Llanowar on top of their deck if they decided to attack with it, that's a really powerful play because it means that they have to draw that Llanowar next turn. So this card is a card that we haven't had this effect in a little while, and it's actually one of the better effects that you can play. And then Warden just makes a 4/4 Sphinx with flying and vigilance. So if you need a threat throughout the game, this offers it. The other card that we should talk about in the removal slot is obviously Ixalan's Binding. This being a 3 of is really powerful. This is a card that some of the Jeskai decks don't have access to right now, or at least they're not playing, unless you're playing the list that I think we've talked about. But Ixalan's Binding is really important for a few reasons. One of the biggest reasons that it's important is that it answers Niv Mizzet, and the other thing is it answers Planeswalkers. So before you were playing a couple of cast downs, things like that previously in these decks, and now you don't have access to those things. So it's really important that you have a catch-all removal spell, and this one happens to sometimes just destroy your opponent if you can get it on something that they have in their hand.
Let's go over the card draw spells.
Yeah, so the card draw spells in this deck are extremely interesting. This list has specifically some very different card draw spells than what you're used to seeing. So we have 2 new draw spells in this deck, and it's kind of interesting to split these because right now we have draw spells in blue-eye control that people have been really happy with in control decks in general. I mean, if we think about Jeskai control right now, we have a 4-mana draw spell that is, 4 mana, draw 2, 4 mana, draw 2 with flashback. We've been pretty happy with Chemist's Insight. And a lot of people, when they saw Sphinx's Insight spoiled, they thought, well, this is just a bad Chemist's Insight. And I also was one of those people that thought that originally, but after seeing Precognitive Perception, I'm not so sure anymore. I think one of the things that R&D is trying to get you to do is be willing to tap your mana during your turn with your Teferi in play so that you can untap those lands. So for example, if I only have to pay 2 mana to draw 2 cards against aggro with Sphinx's Insight, then I don't have to worry about my life total as much while I'm casting my draw spells. And the same thing is true of Precognitive Perception. If I'm paying this 5 mana, that's really 3 mana, but I'm digging 6 cards deep for something like a Wrath effect, like a Settle the Wreckage or a Cleansing Nova, those cards turn into much better cards versus aggro decks when I have a Teferi in play. And also, if I can leave up Settle the Wreckage, but instead cast something that draws me directly 3 cards, that digs me deeper faster than Chemist's Insight was doing.
Tell us about the sweepers in the deck.
One of the things that Blue Eye gets to do that, to be fair, you could sometimes do in Jeskai control if you really wanted to. I mean, if we just look at the list that took 13th at the Classic recently, it was playing main deck sweepers, but you got to play the double white sweepers and be pretty happy about it. And that still might be true of Jeskai control, and it might be true of, Esper control if people start doing that. But just the fact that I have the cleaner mana between the 3 decks and I get to play Settling Cleansing Nova is a pretty big deal. And Cleansing Nova specifically, I mean, we talked about this on the last video that we did for just blue-white control, how I thought Cleansing Nova was an upgrade. It really has just turned out to just be a huge upgrade. I think it creates huge blowouts on its end where you can destroy artifacts and enchantments when you need to. It's really been an MVP in the deck.
Let's talk about the 1-of copy of Nezahal Primal Tide.
Yeah, so obviously we have a win condition here. In this version, we do have Nezahal Primal Tide. So the reason for that is if you're going to play this deck on Arena, you're going to want to just be able to draw Nezahal and win the game. Even if you've ultimated Teferi, you don't want to have to spend the time tucking because it's a significant portion of the time and people will clock you. When you're playing Arena, when you're playing MTGO, people will just be really mean when you're playing a control deck and they'll waste your time. Nezahal makes it so they really can't. You just draw your Nezahal, you cast it, it can't be countered. They can't kill it and they die.
Can you tell us a little about the sideboard?
Yeah, so the sideboard is pretty similar to other blue-white sideboards that you have seen. It's 3 Knight of Grace, 3 History of Benalia, 2 Lyra, 2 Disdainful Stroke, 1 Invoke the Divine, 2 Negate, and 1 Cleansing Nova. So there are a couple things that are important to know when you're playing this deck. One of them is you'll sideboard differently on the play and the draw. There's lots of matchups where you're going to want to bring in Knight of Grace and History of Benalia on the play, where you won't want to bring them in so much on the draw. And that's, going to depend on how much counter magic you want in the deck and the kind of counter magic that you're keeping in. So for example, if I'm keeping in Syncopate, there is a chance that I don't want Knight of Grace and History of Benalia because I'd rather protect those cards with hard counters like Negate. However, if I'm on the play and I'm boarding them out, there's probably 100% chance that I want these cards because I want to be being proactive instead of reactive. And that's important to remember.
Of course, we don't yet know which decks will be played this season, but what challenges could this deck face once Ravnica Allegiance is released?
Yeah, I think that when we think about the things that this deck is going to be weak to, I think its biggest weakness will probably be Esper control in the control mirror specifically. Them having access to discard effects could be a big deal. Now, that being said, I think that this deck got a lot of upgrades. When you think about Absorb, when you think about the Warrant Warden card, this deck definitely got some stuff. And it's going to have legs against most decks in the format. I think it got stuff that specifically makes it better long term. I mean, being able to have things for Niv Mizzet Paragon in blue-white and not having bad mana is going to keep your life total high, give you time to draw things. You're also probably better against this deck now, you know, being able to not worry about the Drakes. Being able to put an Enigma Drake on top of your opponent's deck to make them draw it again is probably pretty good in that matchup and could completely change it. So I think this deck got a lot, and some of its bad matchups got better, but it also is introducing a new bad matchup because I think that Esper Control could legitimately be a deck now. The other thing that I might worry about this deck is a deck that we might see in the form of some style of ramp deck with the new Krasis. The card is blue-green for an XX, and then when you cast it, you draw X cards and gain X life, half rounded down. So if they cast it for 6, they draw 2 cards, gain 2 life, and get a 4/4 flyer, but it's a cast trigger, so you can't counter that, and that's a pretty big deal. So if there's like a Carnage Tyrant in that deck, this deck could have trouble with something like that.
Any last words for blue-white control next season?
Yeah, I think this deck is going to be one of the things that I'll be trying out early on in the format. It's pretty inexpensive. I mean, as far as decks go, I think that other than the fact that Warden is a rare, you got better lands than you had before. So this is something that I think is not too expensive on Arena and something that I'll definitely be trying out.
Thank you so much to Spencer Howland of Constructed Criticism for another deck guide. You can see his work at constructedcriticism.com, and make sure to subscribe to his YouTube channel for some of the best competitive content out there. If you like this video, please make sure to subscribe to Snapkeep Arcade and hit that bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Before we go, I just want to thank everyone who subscribed and supported Snapkeep Arcade last year. I'll be working really hard to grow the channel this year, and you can help by liking this video and spreading the word among the Magic community. Again, thank you so much for everyone's support. This has been Boots with Snapkeep Arcade. Thanks for watching.